Thank you, Simpiwe, for such a wonderful introduction. You do it so well. Every time when you say it, I almost don't believe that you're talking about me. But thanks also for mentioning the importance of the occasion for the Agricultural Economics Association of South Africa. Indeed, as the president of the association, I am so privileged. I feel honored to be given an opportunity to present this important and monumental address for the association on its 60th anniversary. The association has survived quite a number of events over the last 6 decades. It has gone through a number of rough highs and lows. And this is one of the lows or some of the challenges, some of the environments that we are operating in at the current moment. And my topic or my address is looking at the challenges, but also moving beyond, looking at how do we create market opportunities, at the same time not leaving behind those who did not have such opportunities in the past. So it's about making policy decisions in an era of uncertainty. Just to give the background, there is a sense that things are changing. And as things are changing from the difficult times of pandemics, harsh lockdowns, that hope that we may return to normal environment is returning. We have seen recently the political activities, which are always a sign that things might change, might be better, or the relaxation of some of the harsh rules may return. But most importantly, that we will overcome the disease and its impact. So we are really looking forward to that. And as we look forward, we start to think about how we are going to deal with challenges around trade, around the economy. We can have conversations and debates about climate change, about sustainable development goals, and all other economic and global issues with little mention of the pandemic, and that is a good sign. But speaking of trade-related issues, during the pandemic, during the last 2 years, trade has substantially declined around the world, and that's as a result of the pandemic, limited movements, as well as the desire to reduce the infections across the globe, and different countries handle this differently. But as I already mentioned, the change that is being seen, that is expected, the need to create opportunities, the need to look beyond the pandemic or to live with the pandemic is actually on the horizon. South Africa is currently engaged in the trade agreement, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which, when it is signed and eventually implemented, will be the first trade agreement in the last 10 years. This is excluding the EPA and the SACU, this SACU and United Kingdom trade agreements, because those were really adjustments to the changes. In other words, the SADC EPA was negotiated on the basis that the EPAs were going to be difficult to implement if South Africa is not in the negotiations. The trade agreement with the United Kingdom was also a reaction to Brexit. So if you leave those out, in the past 10 to 15 years, we haven't shown any appetite or interest in trade agreements. And now, as the economies around the globe are really looking down, are slowing down, our economy has been on this stagnation for over 10 years now, growth rate of 3% or less. I mean, even with the rebasing of the economy, we're still facing very low growth rates. So we have seen a rise in unemployment. We have seen high income inequality continuing. This is despite the National Development Plan and other policies trying to reverse those, as well as poverty. So the weakening demand conditions imply that we have to look outside our own borders, outside our own markets, to address this. We have done this in the past. We have used trade to move forward, to expand the market beyond what our country is able to supply. we have, if we look at the chart right now, since 1995, we have seen massive growth in trade, both imports and exports. And during that era, you've seen that the implementation of the TDCA with the EU, the SADC EPA, I just mentioned that, trade agreement with AFTA, trade agreement with Mercosur. This, when they were implemented, South Africa's trade in agro-food products, that is primary agricultural products as well as the processed products, they have increased by 14 times compared to the period prior to the implementation of trade negotiations or accession to the WTO. But a further breakdown of these markets, of where these agro-food products are heading to, are really showing that Africa as a continent has grown in leaps and bounds in accommodating South African products, in being a market, a final destination for our agro-food products. So looking at the left pie charts, you realize that in 1995, when we acceded to the WTO, the continent was accounting for only 1/4 of our exports in agro-food products. But even in that 1/4, SADC was actually the main market, with North Africa and the rest of sub-Saharan Africa taking as little as 4%. 15 years later, in 2010, the African market has increased by almost 3 times, to nearly 3/4 of all South African agro-food exports. That's really a massive improvement. That is a massive increase. And SADC again remained the dominant destination. And the same market shares can be seen in 2020, despite the pandemic, despite the challenges of closed borders and all other restriction in movements. The continent was there for our products. Point here being that the reopening of trade agreements, particularly focusing on SADC, is a really important move. Focusing beyond SADC as well, looking into North Africa as well as the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, would be beneficial, or we hope it will be beneficial. SADC has grown massively relative to other regions on the continent, primarily because there's a free trade agreement which has been implemented since 2000. Obviously, over that time, there are adjustments, there are understandings of the market conditions, the requirements, the demand, and so on. And various agricultural products and agro-food products have actually moved forward and improved in order to serve that market. So now, if we hope that the entire continental free trade agreement would have the same benefits and will respond similarly to the way we did to SADC, then you can expect that further market opportunities would be created, would be there for our products. But then, when those opportunities are created, when they are there, will we really be able to meet the demand conditions? In other words, is our supply side sufficient to take up these opportunities, but also to address domestic challenges? The challenges, as I mentioned earlier on, of the weakening demand. Can these markets filter back to create employment? And these are the things that we need to observe, but also address our domestic market conditions. So we have seen a situation where prior to the marketing conditions, prior to the pandemic, the businesses, particularly in those that absorb domestic agro-food products, really showing a different trend in as far as the absorption of this market goes. For example, the chart that you're looking at are the number of liquidations, both total, but the right axis, the right vertical axis are actually showing the liquidations at wholesale, at retail, as well as accommodation. Why does this sector matter? This industry matter because that is where domestically, where majority of our products, of agro-food products go. These are the clients of our farmers, maybe not directly, but through the agro-food value chain. This is where the markets, where the products end up at. So what are the implications if the liquidations, as you can see, they have been increasing around the past decade, but the liquidations have slowed down, which is a good thing. But nevertheless, you still have around 10 to 15 liquidations per month of this industry that absorb our sectoral products. But furthermore, if you look deeper in terms of the same liquidations and you compare that with the volume of sales in retail, wholesale, as well as accommodation, then you realize that actually the sales are increasing while the liquidations are going on. Implications being that some businesses now are getting bigger. Concentration is happening in the market. And most likely, small businesses are being wiped out. Small businesses are either being consolidated into large businesses. And in terms of the free market fundamentals, in terms of the benefits to the consumer, this is sending dangerous signals to the sustainability of our industry, of our markets. If we are remaining with mainly few but big businesses, the challenges for smallholders, the challenges for small businesses, the ability for small businesses to align, to supply this new big and enlarged businesses are starting to be even more difficult. This is something that we need to be aware of. And the implications of this is that the channels through which production, particularly from the farmers to the consumers, starts to be shortened, to be slow. The domination of the market by few companies, as we have seen with the liquidations and increasing sales, implies that we are going to have a challenge where small farmers, small and medium farmers, are able to supply these large businesses. In what Tom Reardon calls it the hourglass, it actually reflects the middle, where if you look at that hourglass, at the top there are approximately 3 million farmers. The Bureau for Food and Agricultural Policy did compile statistics of the farmers from Stats SA, showing that we have as many as 40 medium and large farmers, 40,000. And then we have another 300,000 smallholders, but that are producing for the market. At the household level, we have another 2.5 million producers. Now, that is massive production, but that's the production by about 3 million that needs to reach 60 million consumers if you look at the population of South Africa. But beyond that, as we open up the markets, as we create opportunities outside our borders, that means we are also looking to serve a market beyond the 60 million. However, the interesting part, which is also some of the implications coming from the consolidation, the concentration versus the liquidations, is that all the food that is produced by the 3 million has to go through that very small square in the middle. If there are few players in the middle, and these include whether special markets or markets separated by time, the implications are that you're going to deal with the rules, you're going to have limited options, because by few, that means that your options are already being limited by what is available. And as I said earlier on, this is sending dangerous signals to the consumers, because then the market power starts to take over. And once you have market power, the ability to reflect the actual value, the ability for the market to fully operate under such circumstances become less and less. And some of those who cannot meet the demands of the few in the middle, because you have to go through the middle in order to reach the 60 million consumers. Unless you're producing for your own households, then the producer and the consumer are in the same place, so there's no point that you would need the middle. But majority of the producers are producing beyond household consumption. They have to go through the middle. And sometimes the middle may mean that there's vertical integration, which is fine. But for those, and particularly small players, if they disappear as a result of the squeeze in the middle, there is a feedback to the farmers, the smallholder farmers, because now the demands and the requirements for them to meet your typical market conditions, the food safety requirements, would escalate even further. And this is also putting doubts on the sustainability of some of the outcomes of the land reform, because land reform, as is discussed currently in Parliament, as is discussed in various platforms, one of the key focus, as well as the expected beneficiaries, are largely small and medium players. Now, if the land reform is successful in implementation, that's not the end of it. The land reform has to be successful both in implementation, which means the redistribution or the allocation and giving access to land. But that's just phase one. Phase two is the ability to produce, ability to meet the market requirements, because that is what is going to sustain them. However, if they get subjected to difficult market conditions because of the concentration, it really doesn't matter how much of the African continental market we can create and open, because they are still struggling to meet the domestic requirements of moving the goods beyond the farm or basic or first stage of processing. Further implications are that in the very nature of the markets, in the very nature of trade negotiations, there are structural issues. These are the issues that, even if it is in the interest of trade negotiations to remove, to deal with, to put out of the way as we try to enhance market access, those issues will be there as a result of the structure. As I mentioned, food safety is always the first online. There's a need not only to produce food safely, but there's an additional requirement that you also prove and show that you have done so. So there are technological requirements. We are moving at a faster pace. And these technological requirements, depending on whether you are adopting or you are the innovator, they create additional layer of requirements and compliance. And then, of course, there are infrastructural issues. And when we talk about the African Free Trade Agreement, we are aware of some of the infrastructural challenges that one has to overcome beyond our own borders. But then there are also new issues that are coming up. We have environmental issues, we have the climate change. The pandemic, we talked about it, and it's adding another layer as the pandemic, as the need to be safe, as the need to avoid further infections. All those requirements, all those compliance measures, there is no doubt that they will be on businesses, they will be put on trade, they will be put on those businesses that require to serve these markets. The non-tariff measures, year after year, we report about new measures being more than the ones which were set in the previous years. And then there are energy issues, renewable energy, there are energy challenges. We have been through some of those, so we are familiar with this. But these are the challenges that we need to be overcoming for everyone else. However, they are much higher. They appear to be higher walls for small businesses, for medium businesses. And this is escalated by that squeeze in the middle. And that squeeze, that concentration needs to be addressed so that they can be marketed for primary agricultural producers. Now, how do we go forward when we have these challenges? But the first part is what has already been said and done in the context of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, in that the steps to open up is a good step. That gives an opportunity to have a market post or once we have internalized the presence of the pandemic. But having a market is a necessary condition. A sufficient condition is to have supply side measures, supply side capabilities to produce to meet the demands of that market. It wouldn't be of much value to be a dominant player in the region, on the continent, or even globally, if that domination is on the basis of few companies or benefits few companies. It wouldn't be of no value if that domination is backed by high walls, the high barriers in the domestic market due to concentration. So in a nutshell, trade opportunities or trade agreements have to be seen as a means to an end. They have to be used as a vehicle to achieve the goals, the domestic challenges. And we have this in our policies that we need to deal with issues of inequality. Now, concentration or domination by few companies doesn't do well or does not address that challenge unless there's another distribution mechanism. We have challenges of poverty, which is also expected to escalate following the pandemic, following the increase in higher unemployment, following many months of restricted movement as well as restricted business activities. And going beyond that, with the opening up of the African market, the objective should be to use this as a vehicle to address these challenges. Now, looking backwards to the trade agreements that I have shown earlier on, which have increased substantially, there are really positive outcomes from the previous trade negotiations. But one thing that was missed in those trade negotiations was the emphasis on small businesses. I may even go further and say businesses owned by Black people. Remember, these agreements were signed shortly after we were accepted into the international community, shortly after we have had the first elections, democratic elections, shortly after we have acceded to the WTO. And at that time, South Africa was already a highly unequal society. But the idea of bringing up the smallholders, the medium businesses, and again I repeat, black businesses, as you know, we have policies that focus on that, was not in those agreements. Or if there was an objective, surely that objective was not attained. And therefore, with this agreement, it has to be a clear intention. The opening up of the markets cannot be done only for few businesses. Of course, if that is the policy intention, it also be clear that this is how the implementation has to go. But if small and medium businesses, that would make small farmers thrive, that would make the new beneficiaries of land reform to have markets, they also need to participate and benefit from these market access opportunities. And the way to go about that is, first, we need to incentivize businesses through market conditions. In other words, for businesses to thrive, for businesses to be sustained even during the pandemic or beyond, it does not need handouts, but you need access to markets. It needs a good policy environment, supportive infrastructure that would enable them to overcome both domestic as well as international market requirements. Some of the businesses are operating in the municipalities that are weak, that are not well capacitated. And as a result, poor infrastructure or poor management or lack of service deliveries, they also reflect and filter through to performance of these businesses. And part of assisting these businesses include improvement in service delivery, capacitating and building ability of some of the municipalities to serve the population, as well as to do what the businesses would thrive under. The consolidation of businesses, of few businesses through takeover or by increasing volumes while others are going out, may require that the competition authorities really be very alert, be proactive in their enforcement of the competition laws, because that's where the next barriers would be in. Institutional capacities through partnerships from, small Department of Small Business Development, the National Treasury, the Department of Agriculture, Rural Development, and all other spheres of government, but also private sector and farmer organization working together in removing some of the challenges, in assisting small businesses to thrive, in assisting small businesses to meet market requirements. In other words, there are two ways can do this. The small businesses can be helped to meet the demands, the requirements by their big firms, or small businesses can be allowed to thrive so that they can align, source, and partner with small farmers across. So an important message, or from the policy perspective, is that indeed we need large businesses. In no way is the message saying large businesses are evil. However, they need to exist side by side with small, with medium, as well as other businesses, including informal, for the economy to thrive, to create those jobs, to reduce unemployment, and hopefully income inequality as well. But for that to happen, we need a decisive policy messages. We need policy certainty under a climate like this. So with that, I want to thank you all. And once again, I want to wish our organization, Agricultural Economics Association of South Africa, a very wonderful 60th anniversary. And by the way, this anniversary is celebrated throughout the year, as the organization was formed in 1961. So 2021 is really a milestone year. Thank you.